Greetings from Seoul, Korea. My name is Nick Tasteless Plot, and here with me is Artosis. Where did you go, buddy? Artosis.
Hey, Tasteless, great to be here.
Oh, get in front of the camera.
So, today we have one of my favorite TvZ games. It's gonna be a terrarn versus zerg game, and it's gonna be Mech, my favorite style, because terrarn's the best race and not Protoss.
But seriously, so I've started to finally get some time to watch some Proleague VODs. I know there's a lot of good games, but I just opened one up that I thought was going to be interesting, Cure versus Curious. And boy oh boy, was I not, or I was surprised. I was surprised at the level of play that happened, and also the juicy information that we are going to analyze from a mech game. Yay. So, without further ado, let us hop into this game. Alright, so Outboxer Station. It's a very interesting map. The fourth base is very far away. So right away the map. Okay, so first off, when you're doing mech, it's very important to take into consideration the kind of map that you are doing it on. The things you want to look for is a easy to defend fourth base, so that you can kind of like macro up, and there's like choke points that you can defend if you're playing the turtleneck style. But what we see here that Cure does is an aggressive mech style with one armory. And he only goes up to 3 command centers, so I would consider this a 3 base all in from Cure that he is doing versus Curious. Because of the single armory, the lack of a fourth base, and pulling SCVs. And the unit composition is another important aspect of TvZ mech. In this, I want to say in this matchup, but TvZ mech is like a fourth matchup for terrarn. So, in the fourth matchup for terrarn, it's very important to have a unit composition that can match your opponents. And what we will see Cure doing here is that he kind of builds an all-round good unit composition that can deal with any unit composition that Curious might have on 3 to 4 base economy. In other words, Cure is not going to have to be worried about a massive Mutalisk switch, a massive like Swarm Host switch, and then a Rotary Max, or like massive Broodlord Corruptor switch. Really any Hive switch at all either, because his push is going to hit relatively around that Hive timing, and he might even hit sooner if he scans or sniffs out that Curious is rushing for a fast Hive. So, with that in mind, we're going to take a look at how Cure is able to develop his kind of death ball composition. And once again, this is an all-in by Cure because he does not take a fourth base. He has no plans to transition into a later stage of the game. Mostly from the single armory and pulling SCVs. And he pulls the SCVs because oh, well, I guess we gotta wait until we get there. But he pulls the SCVs because he uses the Hellions and the Hellbats in a very interesting way to combat the Swarm Hosts. And I'll save it for when it actually happens, because it's a very interesting way that he deals with Swarm Hosts, and I have to agree with him. It's pretty much how I deal with Swarm Hosts as well. So hopefully if you guys feel like you get stuck in a Swarm Host stalemate kind of situation, there's like a bunch of Spore Crawlers and all that annoying defense that you can't break, well, hopefully this VOD will help you pummel through that and leave the Zerg wishing he didn't pick Zerg in the first place. Right here. So, right here, Curious is scouting Cure's base. He sees the 3rd command center going down off of a 3 Reaper expand, so he basically knows what Cure is doing. However, Cure kind of he doesn't really trick Curious. I think Curious just wasn't expecting the level of aggression to come out of Kira's play. Uh, Mostly the 3 Reapers and then the Hellions, because he saw the early third base. Normally, if you're going for 6 Hellions into bio play, you want to keep your Hellions alive and defensive. But right now, we don't. Curious doesn't know. We know what Cure is doing, but Curious doesn't know that Cure is. Oh my gosh, these names are so hard. I'm gonna mix them up so much. The Zerg player doesn't know if the Terran player is going for Mech or not. And it's very important for the Zerg player to distinguish if he's going for Mech or not, because he needs to start as soon as possible on the correct unit composition to combat Mech units, such as Swarm Hosts, maybe massive amounts of Mutalisks, Roach Hydra. The sooner he can transition out of Zerglings and Mutalisks, the better chance he will have at being able to create an effective unit composition to deal with the Mech player. So we see here, Curious is going for a really fast layer. He doesn't even have 2 evolution chambers, as we can see on the map. So this is already a very unorthodox build, and one of the things that he's doing to get out that fast layer is he's cutting queen production. And he's really focused on getting out drone count, and he's already saturated. Like, he's taken his 4 gases and he's already saturated them as well, so a lot of his money is going into a very fast layer and a tech kind of rush for him. And as a result, that's left him with only 2 queens to defend against 3 Reaper, 4 Hellion Force, and a handful of Zerglings. So I don't think, like, I think Curious has played enough of this on ladder to kind of know that it exists, and he shouldn't have been caught so off guard by this. Maybe Cure's micro is better than the normal Terran player that Curious usually faces. Maybe Curious doesn't even ladder a lot, and maybe he just plays custom games with the Terrans in... Oh, he's in Incredible Miracle now, not Azubu. Yes, I knew that. So there are a bunch of reasons why he could have been... or why he reacted the way he did in an inefficient manner to clean up all of these units. I'm just giving out different kinds of possibilities. But the bottom line is he did not react to this very well. It's very fortunate for him that he saved the 3rd base. If Cure really wanted to, he could have committed to killing that 3rd base. In hindsight, we know this as a fact. For Cure, all he wants to do is inflict a lot of economic damage, which he's done. As we can see here, he's ahead in worker supply. He also has a larger army, so he's cut a lot of the Zerg army units, and he's killed a couple queens as well. So that's a big mineral sink that Curious used that he lost. Now he has the right amount of queens, though. So, well, he should have had this amount of queens, or if he... Not he should have. If he had this amount of queens when the Reaper Hellion Force was here before, he wouldn't have taken so much damage. But this has completely surprised him. I'm pretty sure that he Okay, so he sacrifices the Overlord right now, but it's kind of too little too late. He doesn't have enough time to make another group of Zerglings, doesn't have time to make more queens. So he's kind of caught off guard with this because his Overlord timing isn't as efficient. And that's a really important thing that Cure was able to... what's the word I'm looking for? Something. That Cure was able to take advantage of, I guess. But there was a fancier word for that. My vocabulary just isn't great. I should probably read the Thesaurus more. I hear it's a fun book. Anyways, so I guess I should go over the build of Cure's a little bit. So he has a total of 1 armory, 1 starport with a tech lab. That's very important. Normally, if you're playing a macro style of mech, you're going to get a reactor and make Viking production. In this case, Cure is getting Banshees. He gets, I believe, 2 more Banshees, and then a Raven when he moves out. And the Raven is also very important as well. I'll go over that later when the push happens. And then he's also making 2 Thors and 2 Hellions. And then he's going to add 2 more factories after he takes his 3rd base. So he goes up to a total of 5 factories, and his initial unit composition right now is Thor, Hellion, Banshee. So if we think for a second, it's about 11 minutes into the game. Let's just say it's 11:30 so that 2 Thors will be out on time, and he will have a Banshee out as well, I believe. So at the 11-minute and 30 mark, let's think for a second what the Zerg might have. Well, the possibilities that the Zerg player could do is a Ling Baneling all-in. That probably wouldn't be too effective against the unit composition that Cure has, Banshee, Thor, Hellion. He could also have some Mutalisks coming out, which is what's happening now. But Thors and missile turrets is Cure's answer to that. And then he could also be doing a very big speed roach push. But once again, there are Banshees that will do a lot of damage. There are Thors that can deal out a lot of damage as well. And then there will be also Hellions to help tank for the Thors and kind of create a meat shield to keep them alive longer. So right now, Cure has a very, very safe unit composition. He is going to be safe against everything that the Zerg throws at him for the most part in this stage of the game. Which is very important because unit composition, if you don't have the right unit composition, and I'm sure everyone who watches Avillo knows this, he's ranted about it a million times, but if you don't have the right unit composition as a mech player, you're gonna die. So it's all about having the right unit composition to stay alive and to counter your opponent's unit composition and kind of keep trading resources until the other player can no longer build units, and then you'll have a superior unit composition as a result. So we see the 2 additional factories going down. We still see Thor, Banshee, Hellions coming out. I'm sure if it was Roach play, then he would have made 2 siege tanks before the 2 Thors. But ultimately, it doesn't matter. It doesn't necessarily matter which units he makes first. Oh my god. Perfect. Alright, so it doesn't matter really if he has to make 4 Thors right now and then 2 siege tanks right after, or like 4 more siege tanks right after, or if he makes 2 Thors and then 2 siege tanks and then 2 Thors and then 2 siege tanks, or if he makes a Thor and then 2 siege tanks and then 2 more siege tanks. You know, like you kind of have to sniff out what the Zerg player is doing. Like if you see roaches, then it's probably a better idea to make a round of tanks before you make some more Thors. But it doesn't really matter as long as you have the right unit compositions, because what Cure is doing here is he's building up his army into kind of a death ball army to use a timing push to exploit. That's the word that I was looking for. To exploit Curious's weakness with the timing. Oh, damn it. So he's making a Raven right now. So it's interesting to note when he makes the Raven. He makes it right before he's about to push out. He should be closer to max right now. He got supply blocked. Never a good thing with a mech player, because mech eats up so much supply. He just jumped up 20 supply right there. So he's making a Raven. He has 2 more siege tanks. Let's see. He can make 3 siege tanks or Thors at a time, I believe. So go back to the production, please. Oh, it would be so nice if I had these replays. That would be like more important than all the NSI secrets combined, having these replays. Alright, so he has 5 Thors, 4 siege tanks, 8 Hellbats, 12 Hellions, 2 Banshees. He stopped Banshee production. He's starting to make Raven. He has kind of like made one. He made like 1 more Thor and 2 more siege tanks, but he's starting to add on siege tanks right now because he has enough Thors. The magic count is 5 to 6. Like you don't need more than 6 Thors to kill Mutalisks, especially at +2 attack. And he has the 1 armory researching attack upgrades. But when you get to +2 attack with Thors, that's when they start 2-shotting Mutalisks instead of 3-shotting them, which is very, very, very important for slow DPS monstrosities like Thors. He's also so he's switched from Hellions to Hellbats, and it's okay to have both of them, but he wants to have more Hellbats because right now we know that Curious. Oh damn it. Okay, so we know that Curious is switching from Mutalisks into Swarm Hosts. The initial Mutalisk switch didn't really do much. It forced a bunch of turrets. It kind of forced Cure to make some Thors, but Cure was going to make them anyways before he moved out. And now it's allowing these mutalisks have kind of allowed Curious to create 7 swarm hosts, take a 4th base, spread his creep out. Creep not that important in this mech matchup, but getting swarm hosts and buying time to get a good enough number out to deal with this unit composition is Curious's next goal, because if he switches into more mutalisks, he's gonna outright die. If he switches into roaches after the swarm host, he's gonna outright die. I guess it would be more important to see when he moves out. He's gonna move out really soon, though. Basically, he moves out as soon as the Raven's done. We also see 65 SCVs. Alright, so there we go. On the minimap, he's moving out. He's pulled a handful of SCVs. He continues to make 1 Thor and 2 siege tanks at a time, instead of like just 3 siege tanks at a time or 3 Thors at a time. He's kind of like splitting it up 33-66. And he's making 4 Hellbats, I believe. Okay, he hasn't started Blue Flame yet. And the +2 hasn't finished, but the timing is more important than the upgrade timing. So it is 15 minutes in the game now. This is normally when the Zerg would be transitioning into Hive tech units if he were to be getting a fast Hive. It would be the time when the Zerg does a tech switch. So if he made more Mutalisks early on, then this would be the time he switches to Swarm Hosts, or it's basically the time that the Zerg has piled up some more money so that he can switch into another form of tech of different units to combat the Terran player. So that's why this timing is very important to hit. You don't want to like delay it anymore, because as we see here now, this big mech army, and he's up a lot of supply because of all the early game damage he's done. Curious should have had a 4th base up by now, but despite that, his army is still very scary army. So this is the fun part about dealing with swarm hosts and locusts. It takes, I believe, 10. I don't know the exact timings, but it takes a certain amount of time for locusts before they go away, and before swarm hosts can spawn more. Okay, so if you get rid of the locusts before the swarm hosts timer resets and more locusts pop out, then the swarm hosts will be essentially useless, because their main damage is a regenerating, or not regenerating, a unit, free unit. I'll call it that. I'm at a loss for words tonight. But yeah, it's a free unit. So what Cure's army is designed to do against swarm hosts specifically is that he has enough Hellbats and Hellions so that he can wipe away this wave of swarm hosts and quickly push forward towards Cure's base. And he also has the Raven for detection for the swarm hosts to clear creep tumors, and for PDD when he gets closer to the base, and when the Raven has enough energy, which I think is a really great, touch to this Terran army. So this army, it's in order to combat the swarm hosts, and now Curious is moving away. He is starting to get a lot of swarm hosts though, but there are a lot of Hellbats and Hellions, and there's SCVs repairing the units as well to keep them alive ever so longer. So he's already cleaned up 1 wave. This is the 2nd wave that he's going to clean up. And notice how fast he cleans it up as well. And I really like this by Cure. He has the 2 Banshees and the Raven. And this forces the swarm hosts to pick up again and then move back. And every time that Curious loses a wave of swarm hosts, he also loses important positional ground too. Like, he can no longer defend his 3rd base. He has to back up even more. Because if he doesn't back up, then his swarm hosts are going to die because the locusts are gone. And although the locusts are chipping away at this army, they're not doing it fast enough. And he still has still has a bunch of Hellbats and Hellions to clear the locust waves before they can respawn really fast. So really, Cure's goal is to kind of do a slow push shove against the swarm host locust army until he's at his doorstep. And as we can see here, Cure is now producing 3 siege tanks at a time. He knows that Curious has gone into pure swarm host production because of the amount of swarm hosts he has. He even scanned and he sees a lot of swarm hosts, and he knows that Curious's economy can't be that great to be making anything else. He just killed the third base and denied those two very important gases and all those mineral patches. So now he's making 3 siege tanks at a time. He doesn't need to add any more Thors. He has a good amount of Thors. He's not going to be blindsided by any Mutalisks because he knows what Curious's economy is like, the state that it's in right now. Not too good. And the third reason that he's making more siege tanks, and he's also making Hellions as well, but I'll get to that right after the siege tanks, but he's making more siege tanks because the Hellbat Hellion number is thinning, as we can see. These Locusts, even though the swarm hosts are getting pushed back, the Locusts are still doing a lot of damage, and they're able to clear away a lot of the kind of the meat shield that the Hellions and Hellbats provide for the terrarn, the more important terrarn units. So the other way to deal with swarm hosts, and especially if you're in a game where there's a bunch of swarm hosts and spore crawlers, is to build up your siege tank count and slowly push forward. So the same objective applies. You want to destroy the swarm host wave before it has enough time to respawn, and in that time period you creep up forward. But instead of doing that with Hellions and Hellbats, you will now be doing that with just a large siege tank count, and that's what Cure is doing right now. He's building up his siege tank count so that he has enough firepower so that when he sieges up, there'll still be like a couple Hellions left over, but when he sieges up, he'll be able to quickly get rid of the Locust wave and then push forward again. And so the reason why he's getting Hellions is to quickly reinforce this point of attack. He's rallying his units across the map, as we can see, and he wants the Hellions to get here quickly so that they can tank damage for the siege tanks to fire and to keep the Thors alive as well. The Hellions are completely expendable, and they're not meant to do damage, they're meant to tank damage. And that's what the SCVs are there for too. And so as we can see, the swarm host wave has been depleted before the swarm hosts have actually gotten a reset timer, and as a result, once again they have to move back as soon as the locust wave pushes out. And this is an extremely dangerous time for Curious because Cure is right at his doorstep. He still has a very scary death ball, and although Curious has like almost 20 swarm hosts, he still cannot break this army, and he's still being pushed back simply because of the fact that Cure's army is killing this locust wave too fast for the next wave to respawn, and that's a result of Cure's army composition. The SCVs, the Hellbats, the Hellions, the siege tanks, even the PDD, they're all working against the swarm host unit composition and really making Cure's job easier and shoving him back. And Curious is kind of out of space now. I mean, Cure is at his natural, and Curious is like his wave is just getting cleaned up really easily, and that's mostly in part because of the very large siege tank count as well. And now he no longer has any locusts. He has to wait for them to respawn, and Cure has sieged up right in front of Curious's main, and these siege tanks, like, there's no locusts coming out, so these swarm hosts are essentially defenseless, and now he's just able to right click and kill these very expensive units that Curious can no longer replace before the next wave comes out. I'm just gonna rewind that just to like give you a time frame of how long that took. So it's 17:55 in the game time right now. Let's see how long it takes before the locusts actually spawn another wave. So that was a full 10 seconds before the locust spawned another wave. That's how fast Cure cleaned up the locust wave, and that's how much time he had left to deal damage to the very defenseless swarm hosts. So now Curious is kind of dead because all of his swarm hosts are dying. He's losing that important locust count. He doesn't have the critical mass of units. Cure is right at his doorstep. He's stopped all of his economy. There's pretty much nothing that Curious can do to come back from this game now. Cure has pretty much checkmated Curious, and the GG is called, and the game comes to an end. So, to kind of go over a quick recap of that game, I really liked Cure's strategy. It really took it really caught Curious off guard. And if we run through other technical scenarios, versus Roach Hydra, you have a very strong meat shield, and you have Thors that deal massive amount of damage. You have the siege tanks that also deal a lot of damage when sieged up. And if they try to tech to Vipers, I don't quite know if Curious would survive until he got enough Vipers out to deal with the mech composition without like losing too much economy and not being able to replace his army. Versus Muta Baneling, easy win. You have enough Thors, you have enough Hellbats and Hellions to clean it up. Versus Fast Hive, Ultralisks, no, definitely not. Versus Corruptor Broodlord, maybe like that might be able to kill him. Thors do a lot of damage to Broodlords though, and the Hellbats and Hellions would still work the same way that they would work against Swarm Hosts and the Locusts, clean them up really fast. And then again, I don't think Curious would survive until he got a Hive Tech. Even if he did take no damage early on, it would still be a very, very sharp timing window that Curious would have to get the Corruptor Broodlord out in time to stop this push. So that pretty much brings the analysis of this TvZ mech game to an end. It was a very cool, creative build by Cure. It's not something it just shows that you don't have to sit back, have your hands off the keyboard and say, I'm going to play a 1 hour mech game because that's the only way to play mech. This is an alternate style that shows a different form of aggression from mech and how you can be aggressive against the very defensive swarm hosts and other unit compositions of the Zerg player. So that pretty much brings the video to an end. Don't forget to subscribe if you liked the video and want to see more, and I will see you all in the next video.